wife gave me this air gun for Christmas. It's a QB79, and the QB79 is the tanker version of the QB78. The QB78 is a Chinese copy of the Crosman Model 160 CO2 air rifle that Crosman began building in 1955. They're neat rifles, and they're a lot of rifle for the money. They cost right around $100, the QB series. 160 will cost probably twice that if you find a decent one. But Crosman hasn't made the 160 for a while. They replaced it with the 2260, which is a somewhat different design in that the 2260 CO2 cartridge presses directly against the valve and seals against it, so the tube is not actually pressurized on the 2260. And that's fine if you're only going to use the CO2 cartridges. And you can modify them. You can convert the 2260 to a pressurized tube design, but the 160 was a pressurized tube design, and it actually took two CO2 cartridges, and one was facing towards the butt of the gun, facing towards the valve, in other words, and the other one was back to back with it and faced forward towards the cap. And what happened was there was a cage on the front of the valve that had a piercing pin on the front of it, and then the cap actually had a piercing pin. So what would happen is you would put the two CO2 cartridges in there, and when you screwed the cap down, it would pierce both of the cartridges and flood the tube. So it actually was really a bulk fill, but it used cartridges to bulk fill it. And you could use only one if you just wanted to use one and get half the number of shots. You could put one CO2 cartridge, one fresh CO2 cartridge, and one spent one, and still be able to use it that way. But anyway, the QB79 is a copy of that, and then they came out with the QB78 is the copy of that, and they came out with the QB79, which is a tanker version, and it was designed to take a paintball CO2 tank. Unfortunately though, CO2 tanks have increased slightly in diameter, so you can no longer use a CO2 tank with these unless you buy an additional spacer to space it down a little further. But fortunately, these Ninja high pressure air tanks are small enough to work, and this is a 13 cubic inch Ninja air tank with it's the SHP Pro and Pro V2, and it has 1100 psi output. Now these things, according to reports, only do about, in the 22 version, only do about 450 feet per second with a standard 14.3 grain Crosman pellet, or something similar to that, about the same weight. So 450 is, to me and to a lot of other people, that's a little bit low. But if you bump it up to 1100 psi, you get a little bit more performance. And now 800 to 850 psi is about what CO2 puts out at room temperature, but a CO2 gun has to be able to handle about up to 1500 or so psi, maybe a little more. In fact, actually they're rated to handle up to 1800, and the the burst disc on a CO2 tank, the safety, safety pressure release is at 1800 psi. So working pressure is up to about 1500. So running 1100 psi in one of these is no problem. And if you look in the video description down below or to the side or wherever it is, I'll put a link to this particular regulated tank, because most of them are regulated at 800 to 850 psi. If you want the greater performance, you need the 1100 psi. So I'll provide a link to where to get one of those if you want to buy one of these air rifles and put together your own high pressure air 22 caliber air gun. So with that said, let's go to the range and do a chronograph test on it. QB79 Ninja HPA Air Tank, 1100 psi, unmodified. Grossman 14.3 grain pellets. .574. .587. .589. .583. .591. That looks like about 585 average, probably.